Creasy.
I pay tribute to the personal testimony that she has given. And what she's touching on is what has been happening in this debate for several years now in this country, which is the expectation that we should be given a reason why women want to have an abortion or why women seek that kind of medical care. And that is where the Trump playbook being brought into British politics, as we now see that it is being, is so dangerous in this context. Because when the leader of Reform, and I note that he's not here today to defend his views, talks about the ludicrous nature of our laws and calls for a reduction in time limit, I don't actually think he's thinking about all those people who get that horrific diagnosis. What he's doing is sending a bat signal to his colleagues and his fellow travellers in America that this country, under his watch, would be open season.
Order. Can I remind the honourable lady, if she's referring to another member, she should have given that member advance warning.
I do apologise, Mr Vickers. I just thought, given the recent pronouncement, the honourable member would be here today, given that he's shown such an interest in this matter. But let me talk then about the Vice President of America, because I hope you will understand that I probably couldn't ask him to be here today, who is one of those fellow travellers who believes that there are votes to be gained by using women's bodies as a battlefield, because that's what the debate about abortion in America has become. What we are seeing is American ideals, this concept of abortion at birth, this idea that women should be expected to explain themselves, being brought into our debates here. And I ask my colleagues across the House, I know many of us will fight tooth and nail against those narratives. Many of us will fight tooth and nail for equality. Do we want to have the power of a human rights commissioner backing us up in those fights when people come for our abortion rights, when people propose further restrictions, further safeguards to abortion? Because this is our chance to do that. New Clause 20 learns from a body of law and a body of practice in Northern Ireland about how we properly protect abortion. We don't just decriminalise it, actually decriminalise it, it properly protects abortion. And I listened to the member for Gower. I urge her to reread New Clause 20, because from what she said, I don't think she has properly. Rather than concentrating power in the hands of ministers, precisely because of the risk that comes from any future government that may seek to use secondary legislation powers, it actively restricts them. It has a triple lock. It says that regulations can only be made to uphold that human rights approach. And then it says they cannot be used to reduce access to abortion or to amend Section 1 of the 1967 Act, which New Clause 20 keeps in play as a list for regulation rather than prosecution. So it does not touch the time limits either. And then it says that any attempt to undermine that human rights lock could only be done with the support of the entire Parliament. Now, anybody here who's a new Member of Parliament, probably in the last year, has had the pleasure of sitting on a delegated legislation committee and wondering quite what you're doing in a small committee room. You are making law, but you're making law in a committee where the balance of power has been determined by the whips, where the government gets to decide who sits on that committee. Those are secondary legislation powers. It is entirely conceivable that New Clause 1, if it is passed, gives those secondary legislation powers, because they are in the policing bill, to a future government without any restriction. I'll happily give way.
Thank you. And I thank the honourable member for giving way, because I think it's interesting that New Clause 1, it's not a competition between myself and her either, but because we both have the same aim here. But also, I think, the fact that over 115 MPs have signed this, and also all of the industry, everybody has signed it. Has she had conversations with them to see why they haven't signed hers?
Still a Creasy.
I'm sorry that the member for Gower feels the need to ask that question, because she will know full well that despite me asking repeatedly to meet with her and repeatedly to talk to the campaigners that she's been working with, that meeting hasn't yet been forthcoming. I'm still open to meeting with people, but I think we need to be very clear on the record. This amendment has in it a lock on the activity of ministers, deliberately so, because this is a human rights issue. It should be a matter that is subject to the entire Parliament. And it should be very clear that ministers could only ever use the powers in this legislation to make human rights compliant legislation. If they did not, the Human Rights Commissioner could challenge them on it and take the Secretary of State to court, just as they have in Northern Ireland. By converse, new Clause 1 allows ministers secondary legislation powers without any restrictions. So I ask again members who are concerned about ministers being involved in writing legislation to look at the difference when it comes to that constitutional role, because I recognise that only you've had the pleasure of repeated secondary legislation committees will you understand the powers that they can have. Certainly I would encourage people to look at how George Osborne used secondary legislation powers to change student tuition fee rates, to change benefit rights. The previous government used them on the retained EU law legislation. The scope of them has been broadening. Many of us respect the role of government, but obviously we recognise that should there be a government that has a more extreme agenda in the future, it will also have those powers. This amendment, New Clause 20, locks those powers down. Mr Vickers, I do not wish to delay the committee any longer, because I know there are others who wish to speak. And actually what really matters is that we are clear about why proper decriminalisation matters, because restricting access to abortion does not stop abortion, it stops safe abortion. Failing to protect access to abortion does not make it easier for people to have children. It simply means there is more pain, more misery, more heartache to be had. There is no right amount of abortions to happen in our society. There is a basic human right at stake here. And members in this House who are alive to the politics and the policy debates around abortion and around politics would do well to think about how they will feel in 5 years' time if what we are seeing at the moment is the start, not the end, of assaults on abortion. I urge members who care about decriminalisation to back New Clause 20 and make sure that we actually have the human right they have in France, in Northern Ireland, for our constituents as well in England and Wales.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and thank you to all those who have contributed to the debate today. And I'd obviously differ from many that have spoken, and would like to concur very much with my colleague from Strangford, who outlined our case extremely well. For me, this is a debate on life, and I believe that both lives matter in every pregnancy. The most basic human right is the right to life. And I do speak today with deep, deep conviction on this issue and a desire to restore life-affirming laws to this entire United Kingdom, laws that protect the most vulnerable in our society. And I think it's important at the very start of my contribution to outline that since the 1967 Act was brought into force in the United Kingdom, 10 million abortions have taken place. One baby is lost to abortion every 2.5 minutes. 26 lives every hour, and this debate will last 3 hours. This is stark. So I come at it from a life perspective and the protection of life. And in every pregnancy, both lives matter. There are times in politics when one doesn't enjoy being right. Back in 2021, I wrote in the House magazine of my fears that the pills by post scheme for at-home abortions was leading and would lead to an increase in medical complications, dangerous late abortions and coerced abortions. Plenty of others expressed similar fears. Sadly, these fears have all proven to be true. A study based on Freedom of Information requests to NHS trusts found that more than 10,000 women who took at least one abortion pill at home provided by the NHS in 2020 needed hospital treatment for side effects, equivalent to more than 1 in 17 women, or 20 women per day. Late last year, Stuart Warby was convicted of using abortion pills obtained by a third party through the Pills by Post scheme to induce an abortion of a woman against her knowledge or will. All of these could have been prevented if abortion providers had not lobbied in the face of warnings about precisely these kinds of incidents occurring, for the removal of in-person appointments where health risks could be assessed and the woman's identity and gestational age accurately verified. It is this last point of ensuring that a woman's gestational